Imagine a spark plug boot swelled up 40% after one WD-40 spray and is now dumping 40,000 volts into the engine block and triggering a phantom misfire that eats $500 in coils. And yet, mechanics use the same WD-40 to free seized ignition cylinders. Same can, same tool. One application prevents a four-figure nightmare, the other creates it. Today, we're taking a look at where WD-40 is safe to use and which places are going to cost you a truck ton of money. Alright, let's start with the repairs a lot of drivers don't see coming until they're stranded or staring at a dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. First up, the ignition lock cylinder. So you slide your key in and it hesitates at the accessory position. Now maybe it's not going to come out smoothly when you try to pull it back out. On a lot of occasions, drivers think that the key's wearing down. But the truth is that you've got spring-loaded pins sitting in chambers, and moisture from temperature swings creates oxidation thinner than a human hair. Now all those pins start binding against the cylinder walls, and after that you've got maybe, 10 days before you're locked out of your own ride. Now that's where the WD-40 comes into play. You gotta remove the key completely, aim WD-40 into the cylinder at around 3 o'clock, and deliver one controlled burst. Now I know what you're thinking. Why 3 o'clock? Well, that's where the upper pin chambers meet maximum friction during rotation. Then you cycle that key in and out slowly, maybe 15 full rotations. See, the penetrant's gonna break the oxidative bond with that hydraulic shock that could snap a pin spring. Fancy talk for just under 2 minutes and you've solved a problem the mechanics could charge up to $400 to repair. Now next up, we've got the ABS tone rings. You know, the machine gear rings behind your wheels that your speed sensors read thousands of times per second. When brake dust bonds to these rings, your sensor starts getting interrupted signals. What follows is that the ABS module thinks that there's a wheel speed mismatch, so it throws a code that lights up your dashboard. Now, in such instances, most shops will quote hub bearing assemblies and drop to a $600 invoice. Now, before jacking with all that, you can spray a fine WD-40 mist directly onto these tone ring teeth. See, if there's microscopic corrosion or contamination, the solvent causes a visible reaction where the grime literally changes color. Now, all you've got to do is clean it off, clear the code, and the problem's solved. No need for new parts or a 4-hour labor charge. Now, we've also got oxygen sensors and blend door linkages. When it comes to O2 sensors, well, their electrical connectors corrode from constant heat cycling between 400 and 1200 degrees. Yeah, that corrosion then creates resistance that makes fuel trims go haywire. Yet a tiny amount of WD-40 on the connector body restores conductivity. You do the math. A $95 sensor replacement and a $2 connector cleaning. On the other hand, when blend doors bind up from lack of movement, you're bound to hear clicking, snapping sounds behind your dashboard, which then culminates in your temperature control stopping responding. Shops quote $850 for actuator replacement because that's what the computer points to. But seasoned techs know that simply pulling out the glove box, locating those linkage pivot points, and hitting them with WD-40 will buy you an extra 6 to 18 months before any real parts failure. Alright, let's shift our focus over to what moisture does outside your vehicle after it disappears and how WD-40 can bail you out. Kicking us off are ground straps. Now, these are the braided metal cables connecting your battery negative terminal to the chassis and your engine block to the firewall. Now, when they corrode, you got voltage drops that don't make sense. Your headlights dim when you hit the brakes. In other instances, the starter cranks weakly even though the battery tests fine and the radio cuts out at random points. Now you walk into any auto shop and you're going to get hit with a $400 invoice for diagnostics, but you don't have to part with that much money. What you need to do is pull back the rubber boot on those connections and you're going to find wider green powder. Now that's copper oxide corrosion and it's an insulator. It's primarily your electrical system attempting to push 12.6 volts through what's essentially becoming a resistor. Spraying WD-40 directly on the connection point can help you solve this problem. If it fizzes or bubbles, well, that's an active corrosion eating the conductivity in real time. Clearing it with a wire brush and then coating it with the same WD-40, that's all you need to do to prevent those mysterious electrical gremlins that cost upwards of $300 at the shop. Alright, let's talk about the hidden structural joints, the door hinges, tailgate latches, and hood latch assemblies. When the pivot points cease from rust, you start forcing things. And forcing a stuck door hinge tweaks the door frame, while forcing a tailgate latch cracks the plastic housing. In reality, what starts as a $12 lubrication issue easily becomes a $480 hinge replacement or a $350 latch assembly. So what do you do here? Well, ensure you spray every hinge pin, every pivot point, and every latch mechanism at least twice a year. And just like that, you've dodged yourself a pretty costly visit to the shop by doing something that takes less than a minute. If you're already seeing how these small moves prevent massive bills, make sure you go ahead and hit subscribe. Because one wrong move related to what I'm about to show you next doesn't just cost you money, it leaves you stranded. Alright, let's talk about the area where electrical problems are born, inside the cabin and behind the dash. Starting off with the alternator. Now you might think that since it's a sealed unit, it's immune to the environment, but fine dust, moisture vapor, and road grime can work their way inside over time, especially in older vehicles or those driven in wet climates. That contamination ends up interfering with brush contact and creates tiny voltage inconsistencies that don't trigger a warning light, but they do stress the whole charging system. But a good old-fashioned controlled application of WD-40 around external contact points and housings helps displace moisture and limit surface contamination before it migrates inward. We also can't overlook spark plug boots. Now these boots live in extreme heat, and as the rubber ages, it dries, stiffens, and begins to crack internally. But instead of spending hundreds of dollars on replacing them, a light targeted application at WD-40 helps keep the material supple, reducing micro cracks that allow voltage to leak out under load. Now, it's important to note that this isn't about soaking anything, rather it's about conditioning. When misfires appear only under acceleration or heavy throttle, seasoned mechanics are going to look here first, long before resorting to replacing coils or plugs. When we talk about wiring harness connector sensors, we definitely know they rely on clean, stable signals. But oxidation and grime introduce resistance, so the computer can't always identify things correctly. Now that's where the magic of WD-40 comes in handy, as it can loosen stubborn buildup inside connectors, restoring proper contact without disassembly that eats up hundreds of bucks. Now it's not all rosy when it comes to WD-40. If applied incorrectly, it can quietly create expensive problems that could easily set you back thousands of bucks. For instance, rubber seals and painted surfaces are particularly vulnerable. Overspraying ignition cylinders might feel harmless, but the outcome could easily mean a small problem spirals into a sticky nightmare. Even components like ABS sensors or oxygen sensors can throw false codes if WD-40 ends up on surfaces where sensors detect electrical signals. The key thing here is precision. A carefully targeted spray keeps WD-40 within the targeted areas and ensures that it doesn't harm by getting to where it's unwanted. These might seem like simple surgical steps, but in reality, they make a world of difference. Even seasoned mechanics occasionally misapply WD-40, but following these guidelines lets you extend the life of components that silently fail in other cars. Setting aside a few minutes now and doing these few sprays of WD-40 in the right places could be the first step in helping prevent thousands in repairs while keeping your car running smoothly, safely, and reliably. Now, if just one of these tricks saves you from a 4-figure repair bill, make sure you hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.